Hello and welcome to the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bercia, Special Assistant to the President for Global Perspectives at the University of Central Florida. Our guest today is Sheryl WuDunn, former journalist, Pulitzer Prize winner, and co-author of a new book, Half the Sky. Welcome, Sheryl.
Hi there, John. Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Tell us about Half the Sky. It seems to be rocketing up the charts, and a lot of people are interested in reading it.
Well, we really hope people will be interested in the message. So Half the Sky is turning oppression into opportunity for women worldwide is really about the cause of our times. What we think is the major moral challenge of this century, which is that we need to address the brutality that so many people in so many parts of the world face because of their gender. But more than that, beyond the right or wrong of it all, we also think that on a purely practical level, one of the best ways to end poverty and to fight terrorism is to educate and empower women and girls around the world.
Could you give us some examples so our viewers will understand what you're talking about?
Well, so let's take the example of Saima, who is a woman who lived in a village outside Lahore, Pakistan. She was, married to a man who used to beat her every day. He was not employed, so he took his frustration out on her by beating her every day. Her mother-in-law, when she had her second girl, said to her son, this woman is never going to bear you a boy, so you might as well take a second wife. Saima and her family were so poor that they basically could barely feed their second girl, so they sent off the second girl to an aunt. Just then, just as Saima was just devastated, there was a microlending group that paid a visit to the village and gave Saima a $65 loan. So Saima said, I'm going to start an embroidery business. It turns out that she was really good at embroidery. And so she started embroidering stuff. The merchants loved it, and they said, here, give us more. She soon had to hire other people because she couldn't produce enough. She was hiring 30 families to help her do embroidery.
Now, $65 doesn't sound like much, but relative to this economy.
$65 in the village outside of Lahore, Pakistan, went very, very far. And soon she was actually, not only did she repay that loan, but she was able to repay the debts that her husband had incurred. And when the merchants called for so much product from her, she needed someone to transport the goods from the village to the marketplace. She hired her husband. So now no one's talking about a second wife.
I see.
That's how you can empower women.
Now you have obviously in the course of the research for the book gone to multiple countries, and that's a great example. Are there some others you might share with our viewers?
There are a number of others. I mean, there's another example that we talk about in Half the Sky, a woman named Goretti. Again, this is a story of microlending and what microlending can do. I mean, the key thing here is that you can take women who have been oppressed, really thought that they can't do anything with their lives. If you give them a little bit of incentive, a little bit of support, they can actually go a really long way. And there has been evidence that has shown that when you give scarce resources like money to women in these societies where women tend not to be educated, she tends to take those scarce resources and invest them in solid businesses, more so than men. So Goretti is in a similar situation. She got a $2 microloan, and she basically turned that into a business, and she ended up paying the hospital bills for her husband when he got malaria. That's something that really has turned the household around and elevates the status of women, not only in that household, but in the village and in the community that Goretti works in.
Now let's go back in time a bit. You were in journalism for a number of years, and you were the first Asian American to win the Pulitzer Prize. This was for your work in China during the Tiananmen Square crisis of 1989. Take us back to that period. What was it like? What were you covering? Did you realize you were on top of one of the biggest stories of all time?
Well, it's funny because you know, that's in some ways where we got the seed for this book, Half the Sky. When we were in China, we were writing about the democracy movement, and we were outraged at the killings of about 400 to 800. We estimate between 400 and 800 students and people were killed on Tiananmen Square. We were outraged by that, and that was front page news. It got lots of column inches. The next year, we were traveling through the countryside of China in the rural areas, and we discovered something that we didn't even know existed, which is that there were 39,000 baby girls in China who died every year before they reached the age of 1 because they didn't have access to health care, or they weren't taken to the doctor, they weren't given the right inoculations. They just died every year, 39,000 a year. And that didn't get a single column inch. So we thought, my goodness, is our journalism askew? Is there something wrong? And what we realized is that, you know, journalism is really good at writing about things that happen in one day. But when things happen every day, when baby girls die every day, it's not news. So we really wanted to find a way to really capture the stuff that happens every day, but that is just even more outrageous in some ways, or at least as outrageous as what goes on sometimes in the daily news.
Mm-hmm. And with the passage of time in China specifically, have you seen an improvement in this situation regarding the status of women and the treatment of children?
We actually have. I mean, China is such a vast territory that you see, you know, the yin and the yang. You see the positive and the negative, and they grow up side by side. So on the one hand, while there are still, you know, outrageous political abuses, human rights abuses, at the same time you see probably the greatest number of people in any single country lifted out of poverty. And, you know, the story about Daimanju that we write about in Half the Sky is remarkable. It's a story about this one girl who was 13 years old and pulled out of school in a remote area of the mountains in Hubei province. Her parents said, I'm not going to pay $13 because, you know, to keep this girl in school when she's going to spend her whole time in the rice paddies. Well, that's what most families think in the rural areas. We wrote about that story and got a lot of donations, and essentially put not only her through school, but all the other girls in the area. And she went on not only to finish middle school, high school, and vocational accounting school. She went down to Guangdong province and got a job in a factory as an accountant, sent money back to her parents, who then were able to build a new house. The entire village, based on the money that all the daughters sent back to the parents, they had so much clout in that area that they were able to get a road built to connect them to the rest of China. They stood out among all the villages in the area because they educated their girls. And that's a real success story. That shows that there are really some great strides being made in China.
You know, that sounds absolutely outstanding, and I'm wondering, are there more stories like that, or is that sort of in a category by itself?
No. I mean, my ancestral village in Guangdong province, you know, it's in Taishan, which started early, but it was the same story. I mean, the girls in that village were able to get educated, and they actually left the village and then moved to the county seat where there were factories. You know what those factories were making? They were making our clothes. They were making our clothes, our bags, our shoes. They jump-started China's economy. It was the apparel that they were sending out of China and that Americans were buying, and, you know, that's what gave them not only the economic means to, you know, get income, but also really get China's economy, you know, on its start. And so you could say that China's robust economy now was built on the backs of Chinese women.
Now, you come from a background that involves both journalism and business, and what is your best estimate of how long China can continue with these successes, especially in light of the recession we're suffering right now?
China's an interesting case because if you look at how they handled the economic crisis of the past year, they actually fared better. They managed it better than other places. Certainly it didn't originate in China, so they really got the whiplash effect, but they have navigated very deftly. And when they've implemented their stimulus package, of course, partly because they're a command economy, they were able to implement it much more efficiently than at least it's been done so far in the US. In terms of their future path, economic path, I mean, they really are, in a growth phase. It's not going to last forever. And they will have cycles, ups and downs. I mean, they have gone through a down period and they were resilient and could bounce back, but it's not going to always be like that. But for now, I mean, they have a sustained period of growth in the future that they can look forward to, partly because there are so many areas of China that have not yet been touched by that growth. And so as that hopefully then propagates out to those regions, there will be growth, more growth to come.
What about the connections between the continued growth of China economically and the standing and stability of the Communist Party?
The Communist Party knows that the reason they are staying in power is because they are providing economic growth to their people. They know that it doesn't rest with any communist doctrine. It rests with them being able to continue to provide economic growth and material growth for their people. It also rests on being able to contain corruption. It's really in satisfying the material needs of their people. And once they stop doing that, they know that their legitimacy, their future is in jeopardy, and that they lose their legitimacy. So they are doing their utmost to maintain that mantle, that economic mantle.
So even though China is doing relatively better than other countries and is maintaining a relatively higher growth rate during this recession, they're still in a precarious position if that should slow down, if that growth rate should decrease substantially.
Yeah, I mean, they know that they've got a lot of challenges. I mean, they also have to manage a lot of new problems that have cropped up, including the growing inequality between the rich and the poor in China, which is really growing. Environmental problems are huge. They know they need to tackle that. I mean, they have to satisfy a lot of the new problems that are cropping up. The fact that they are an aging society. What they will be the first aging society of a developing nation. So they need to really be able to manage that. There's no Social Security, there isn't universal health care. They need to figure out how to manage that. So they've got some huge problems ahead. So they need to maintain high levels of growth just to stay still, just to keep standing still.
And one of the issues that many of our viewers have read about in recent months has been that of the minorities in China. For so long, people thought this was a homogenous society. They never dreamed there were more than 100 million minorities of various kinds. How will that play into this continuing story about economic growth and reform?
Well, right now, I mean, the Han population is, 93% of the overall population, so it's still huge. It really outnumbers the minorities, but the minorities are there, and they are in some of the very critical areas where the Chinese see a lot of vast resources. So they will be a problem, they will be flashpoints and tension points. They're not going to crater the government or the country's economy, but they will be an issue that they do have to deal with, especially in the Xinjiang areas in the west, where the connection to the route to the stands, the nearby stands, Muslim population is quite sensitive, and the Tibetan population is quite sensitive. So they will have to keep monitoring those areas and actually deal with them in a more deft way than the way they have dealt with in the past.
Now, you and your husband have not only been involved in covering the issues of women's rights and oppression in various places, you've actually taken a role in trying to assist individuals here and there where you could. And I know you were talking at one point about Cambodia. Could you share a little bit of that for our viewers today? What you actually did there to help women emerge from forced servitude? Right.
We do hope, Half the Sky in many ways, we wrote Half the Sky to inform people about what is going on. We also want to engage people so that they can participate in helping find a solution. In the same way, they don't have to do it obviously in the same way that we did, but we do hope that in a small way they can help. My husband actually, one of the things that he did and is known for is that he purchased 2 Cambodian women who were basically enslaved in a brothel, and he actually got receipts for them, but he set them free. And we really discovered that helping others is not as easy as you think it is. It's always fraught with complications, just as China is itself. What we've learned in China, it's always very complicated. But in the end, We write about the ups and downs of these girls that we set free, and in the end, we did show, though, that if you try to help a little bit, it can go a long way, and that women can be turned around.
What was the approximate cost of setting them free?
It's sadly just a few $100s.
That's what I suspected.
You know, it's really a grim tale of the conditions that they had to face, because here, I mean, you have to call it slavery. They were actually tricked into being sold. Their family or they did not get any money. You know, they also were forced to work. They were not paid a cent. They got no payment for any of the work that they did, and they were barely fed because the brothel owners didn't want them to get fat, because that doesn't look good for the customers.
Unbelievable, unbelievable. When people think about helping women in these situations of oppression, what is the best thing for them to do? I know people often feel helpless. They think, what can I do as an individual that would help one of these women in another country? But there are ways they can help. There are organizations that literally enable you to assist one person at a time.
Absolutely. Kiva.org, for instance, is an organization that really helps look for entrepreneurs who need money. And so you could go to Kiva.org and make a loan. We basically wrote Half the Sky as a do-it-yourself foreign aid toolkit, because we talk about ways that individuals can help. In micro ways. We have a list of organizations in the back of the book that you can choose based on what you're interested in. If you care about education, for instance, one of the things you do, $7 will help keep a Cambodian girl in school because it pays for her book supplies for 1 year. $7. And on Kiva, you can just make a microloan to a different entrepreneur. Find out what entrepreneurs need in which countries, in Pakistan or in India, and you get your money back. So it actually doesn't even cost you anything, except for the opportunity cost of, but you actually get an interest rate too. So it really is something that you can make a difference in the lives of women abroad.
And I think the other hesitation people have is when they give money to organizations, they never see that actually going into the hands of someone they'd like to help. How do you ensure that the organization you're looking at or considering?
Well, Kiva.org, for instance, you can actually make a loan to a particular individual, so it's people to people. And a number of others, CARE also has a method where you can actually make a loan to a particular entrepreneur. And then you have the safety of the organization in between, because they've actually screened some of these individuals who need the loans and who have legitimate businesses, so that it's not just going into the ether. I know there is concern about aid organizations and how much of your dollar really is getting out there. But when you're dealing with the developing world, so much of it is that there are zero outcomes. So if you find an organization that can create an outcome that is positive for women in the developing world, then it doesn't matter that maybe 85 cents of the dollar is getting there, because it's getting there where zero would get there because it is so hard to operate in the developing world. And if you just get a little bit of support to those women, you can go so far.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you move ahead with your project and with other projects, what are your biggest concerns? Do you think there's the potential for some of the ideas you've set forth in Half the Sky to really play out and lift or help lift a tremendous number of women? Or are we facing, because of the recession and climate change and so many other obstacles that seem to be coming up in all directions, are we facing just a very, very difficult period for the decades ahead?
I really don't think so. I'm really optimistic, because I have seen women turn around within a year. I mean, we're not talking decades. You can actually help someone and turn them around within a year. And maybe if you want to get them even on a better footing, it'll take 2 years. But change can happen very, very quickly. And it's not that women are a problem. They really are the solution. We've seen women actually, when they've survived things like being in forced prostitution, they come out and they there's a woman who's built a center to help other women, and she's now multiplied her experience by hundreds because she's, running so many people through her center that she's helping and turning them into productive members of society. The key is turning the women into productive members of society, because then they not only contribute to the income of their household, but to the income of their village, the income of their county, and then at the aggregate level, to the GDP of a country. It's exactly what China has done. The GDP growth rate is so high, partly because of women who have been able to contribute to that economy.
Mm-hmm. And what do you say to the critics? There's always someone who comes in and looks at what you're doing and says, well, these people are in such difficult circumstances. You're actually taking them out of their context by removing them from forced servitude and causing additional problems, that in the long run, what you're attempting is not that helpful. In fact, it's counterproductive.
My grandmother's feet were bound. My mother is sitting very closely there. Her mother's feet were bound. And there was a movement within China to eradicate foot binding. There was support from the outside. Boy, am I glad that there was that movement. I am so glad that there was support from the outside. There was a movement within China to eradicate foot binding, because my feet are not bound. My mother's feet are not bound. So to those people, those critics, I say, no, you can do a lot of good, and you can unleash enormous economic potential for the world.
Do you have a new project you're looking at following this one, or any other?
No, this is it for now. We really think this is the cause of our time, that eradicating the brutality that so many women in so many countries face around the world, that is the cause of our time.
And are you attempting to reach a certain number of people in a certain number of countries over the next several months in addressing this, or do you have some kind of timetable or schedule?
We hope that you and your viewers will spread the word, because each one of you, each viewer, can actually help and join the movement and spread the word, because it's only when public opinion starts demanding change that change will come.
Mm-hmm. And in all of this, what has been most gratifying to you personally?
Most gratifying is when I meet someone who has never heard of this issue and realizes, wow, I've been out of it for so many years. This is really pretty amazing. And then they join the movement. To me, that's really gratifying. And thankfully, I've met so many people in the past few weeks who have said that to me, that it really is gratifying.
Mm-hmm. And when you made the decision to leave journalism and to go into this broader but different world where you'd be doing research and not really know what the outcomes were going to be, even though you had a cause, what kept you going? Were you convinced as much then as you are now that this was the issue of the moment, and that you really
no, I
needed
think this is definitely the issue of the moment. I mean, there's nothing more fundamental than just the rights of women. I mean, just the basic right to survive when it comes to maternal mortality in a place like Niger, where 1 in 7 women die in childbirth. Just the right to bear a child safely. Where 1 woman a minute dies around the world in childbirth, or sex slavery, when women are forced into prostitution. We have it not only in Cambodia and Pakistan and India, we have it in our own country here in the US. I mean, that's just a basic right, not to be forced into prostitution. And then, rape, violence against women. I mean, these are just such essential rights that it's just the biggest moral challenge of our time.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Sheryl WuDunn, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
And thank you for the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bercia, and we'll see you next time.